Surviving a cartel machete attack in the dead of night should have been the scariest thing to ever happen to these 7 teenagers. But as they hid up in the branches of a massive tree, bleeding, freezing, and praying to God for sunrise, they looked down into the pitch-black woods. And they realized the men hunting them were the least of their problems, because what was walking out of the fog wasn't human. Welcome back to The Shadows Prevail, guys. Whether you're tuning in from right here at home or anywhere else across the globe, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. I hope you're all doing great and staying safe. Just like always, I'm back with another terrifying 100% true story for you. But real quick, before we dive into the madness, I need to dedicate this episode to some real unsung heroes. Honestly, if it weren't for them, this story would have ended in an absolute tragedy. I'm talking about the agents at the Arizona Border Patrol. Specifically, the men and women stationed at the Nogales camp back in December of 2001. Guarding the border is no joke. These people patrol some of the most rugged, isolated, and unforgiving terrains on Earth, day and night. So, a massive salute to you all. If any relatives or family members of the agents who served at the Nogales station back then are listening, please pass on our endless gratitude to them. Once you hear what went down, you'll understand exactly why. The story I'm sharing today was actually sent to me by a friend of mine. Let's just call him Ivan. And look, just to make sure every single detail was 100% accurate, I literally got on a video call with his younger brother. I wanted to hear exactly what happened that night, straight from someone who lived it. And guys, it is easily one of the most insane survival stories I have ever heard. So, let's set the scene. It's December 22nd, 2001, early winter. But out there in the desert mountains, the cold already bites hard. A group of 14 high schoolers, right around the age of taking their semester finals, decide to organize a trip down to the Arizona border. They actually planned to go the year before, but it fell through. So this time, they were determined to get out there, explore the deep woods and mountains along the border, run some experiments, and just hang out. This wasn't some official school-sponsored field trip. It was literally just a massive group of friends going out on their own. The plan was simple: check out the desert, the mountains, and the border fences. Out of these 14 kids, the main guys in our story are Mark, Ricardo, and 2 guys who are both named Jake. Let's just call the first one Old Town Jake. The rest of the kids aren't really involved in the nightmare that follows, so we'll just leave their names out to keep things simple. Early that morning, a van pulls up in front of their high school. They load up and hit the road. Now, you gotta remember the timeline here. This is 2001. We're not talking iPhones and Google Maps. Out of the 14 of them, only 2 guys had those old-school bulky brick phones. They also brought 2 actual film cameras. You know, the ones where you literally had to wind the film. Around 11 look and ma. They arrive at the Coronado National Forest. It was peak field trip season, so there were plenty of tourists around. They had picked up some takeout from Tucson, parked the van at the designated spot, and started exploring. By 1:30 or 2 p.m., they headed back to the base camp, ate, and chilled out for a bit to rest up. After resting up, they decided to split into 2 squads of 7. Since they only had 2 cell phones, they made sure each group had one, just so they could check in with each other. Mark, Ricardo, and the 2 Jakes were all in the same squad, and Ricardo was the one holding the phone. So, Ricardo's group starts hiking. Their goal was to hike deep enough to actually see the border fences. But they just kept walking. And walking. They walked so far that they completely left the safe touristy zones of the park. You know how those national parks have loudspeakers echoing announcements or directions? Yeah, they couldn't hear those anymore. Just absolute dead silence. They were exhausted. Their legs were giving out. And as they looked up, the sun was starting to set. That's when the reality hit them. They were completely, hopelessly lost. They had walked in the totally wrong direction. Away from the border, and straight into the dense, wild mountains. There wasn't a single house, cabin, or town for at least 5 to 10 miles. And to make things worse, Ricardo checks the phone. 0 bars. The nearest cell tower was way back at the base camp. It was getting dark fast, and the temperature was nosediving. Even though they had winter clothes and thick socks on, that desert winter cold was creeping straight into their bones. Suddenly, one of the Jakes spots a few guys standing at the bottom of a nearby hill. A massive wave of relief washed over the boys. They figured, thank God, locals. They can point us back to the trail. All 7 of them started waving and shouting for help. Hearing the noise, the men turned and started walking up toward them. There were a couple of them, maybe early 20s. But as they got closer, the vibe completely shifted. They didn't smile. They didn't say a single word. Instead, they instantly attacked. These guys pulled out massive machete-like blades. They started yelling in this rapid mix of Spanish and English. Turns out, these weren't friendly locals. They were part of a smuggling network, or a human trafficking cartel. Because the kids had accidentally stumbled into their territory, the smugglers weren't going to help them. They were going to eliminate the witnesses. Old Town Jake took a brutal, sickening hit. He got slashed deep with one of the blades and immediately started bleeding out. The kids were totally unarmed, completely defenseless, trying to block machete swings with their bare hands as the woods plunged into total darkness. Jake collapsed to the dirt, groaning in agonizing pain, losing a terrifying amount of blood. But somehow, running on pure, unfiltered adrenaline, he forced himself back onto his feet and screamed at his friends, "Run, let's go. They're gonna kill us." And they ran. They blindly sprinted into the pitch-black forest, with the cartel members chasing right behind them. Their brains were completely in survival mode. As they crashed through the brush, they kept shouting each other's names into the dark, just so nobody would get separated. They had absolutely no clue where they were running. They just kept sprinting. Until, eventually, the sounds of their attackers faded into the darkness. Nobody even dared to look back. When they finally stopped, the adrenaline crashed. Both Jakes instantly collapsed to the ground. Old Town Jake passed out from severe blood loss. And the other Jake? He literally fainted from pure physical exhaustion. When the 2 Jakes finally came to, the group realized that by some absolute miracle, all 7 of them were still together. Someone ripped off their undershirt and tied it as tight as they could around Jake's stab wound. He had lost a terrifying amount of blood, and the running had just made it worse. It was pitch black now. But they knew they couldn't risk turning on the cell phone screen. If those cartel guys were still out there hunting them, a glowing screen in the dead of night would be a massive target. So, they told Mark, who had the phone, to put it on silent, completely turn off the screen and zip it deep inside his jacket. They took a second to assess the damage. Everyone was battered. Sprained ankles, twisted knees, deep cuts all over from running blindly through the branches. Mark kept unzipping his jacket every few minutes, praying for even one bar of signal. But nothing. The cold was becoming unbearable, and the freezing temperatures were making their injuries hurt 10 times worse. They couldn't walk anymore, and even if they could, wandering around a dark forest full of snakes, wild animals, and cartel members was a literal death sentence. They needed to bunker down. They looked through the dark and noticed a massive hill right in front of them. It was the highest peak they had seen all day, but what was weird about this specific hill was that it was completely bald. Every other mountain around them was covered in thick brush and trees, but this one was entirely bare. They figured if they climbed to the top, maybe, just maybe, they could spot the lights of a distant town. They painfully dragged themselves up the hill. But when they reached the top, nothing, just an ocean of darkness and thick fog. Since the hilltop was flat and had no bushes for predators to hide in, they decided it was the safest place to stay. As they looked around, they noticed one single giant tree standing alone a little further away. In the dark, they couldn't really tell what kind of tree it was, but it was massive, spreading out like an umbrella, probably a giant ponderosa pine. The branches were incredibly thick and hung really low to the ground. So, all 7 of them climbed up into the tree. It was actually surprisingly spacious up there. Mark checked his phone. It was exactly 11 p.m. Using their backpacks as pillows, they huddled together, whispered for a bit, and eventually, pure exhaustion took over. They all fell asleep. Deep in the middle of the night, Ricardo suddenly woke up. He looked around. The other 6 guys were still out cold. He was just about to close his eyes again when he noticed something down below. A faint glow coming from the woods. He sat up instantly. Because they were high up in the tree on the tallest hill, he had a perfect bird's eye view. He saw glowing objects moving through the trees, but it wasn't flashlight beams. It looked exactly like radium, that radioactive glowing metal you see on old watch dials. It wasn't just one light. It was a massive cluster of them, and they were heading straight toward their hill. Thinking it was a search party with the rest of their friends, Ricardo woke everyone up. "Look," he whispered. They all stared down, feeling this massive wave of relief. But 4 or 5 minutes later, that relief turned into pure, suffocating horror. They realized what they were looking at wasn't a search party. It wasn't even human. It was a massive group of figures, at least 150 to 200 of them, dressed in glowing, pure white robes. And here's the detail that absolutely messes with my head. Their bodies were emitting light, but that light wasn't illuminating the ground or the trees around them. They were just glowing from within. And as they got closer, the boys realized these beings were easily twice the height of a normal human. They were completely trapped, A bleeding friend, nowhere to run, surrounded by these towering, glowing entities in the absolute middle of nowhere. Their brains couldn't process it. They were so terrified they literally lost their voices. Ricardo quietly panicked. "Climb higher," he hissed. "If we stay this low, they'll see us. Move up." They silently scrambled higher into the canopy, hugging the thick branches. "Don't even whisper," Ricardo warned. "If you're too scared, just close your eyes." The glowing figures marched right to the base of their hill. From the tree, the boys noticed something else. 4 of these giants were carrying a coffin. The rest were walking behind them in perfect, synchronized lines, exactly like a military march. The kid who told this story said he couldn't tell if the coffin was made of wood or metal, but he swore he had never, ever seen anything with such intricate, beautiful craftsmanship in his life. The procession stopped about 100 to 150 meters away from their tree. By now, the kids' eyes had completely adjusted to the dark, and what they saw next made 0 sense. The entities lowered the coffin near a freshly dug grave. But here's the thing. When the kids had hiked up that hill a few hours earlier, the ground was perfectly flat. There was no hole. There was no dirt. Unless they were completely blind in the dark, that grave appeared out of thin air. Up in the tree, the boys were literally clinging to the wood. They were terrified that if they slipped, they would fall right into the middle of whatever this was. They could hear their own heartbeats echoing in their ears. If someone coughed, if a dry branch snapped, it was over. Everyone was silently praying to God. Then, the silence broke. Figures standing at the front near the coffin started speaking. The boys couldn't understand a single word. It wasn't English. It wasn't Spanish. But the cadence, the tone, it sounded exactly like a priest giving a eulogy at a human funeral. The figures in the back stood in complete, respectful silence. Then, one of the entities in the front, wearing what looked like royal, highly detailed robes, gestured toward another specific entity. It was like a passing of the torch. They placed a glowing crown on this new entity's head, and then the newly crowned figure led the final prayer. After the burial was done, the entities lined back up in perfect formation and marched away, taking a slightly different route. But right before they disappeared into the distance, a sudden breeze hit the tree. It was a perfume. The boys smelled the most intoxicating, otherworldly fragrance they had ever experienced. To this day, 20 years later, none of them have ever smelled anything remotely close to it. Even after the glowing figures completely vanished, the boys stayed frozen in the tree. No one spoke. They just waited, praying for the sun to come up. In one single night, they had survived a cartel attack and witnessed something completely beyond human comprehension. When the morning fog finally rolled in, Mark whispered, "Let's climb down." It was extremely dangerous. The branches were slick with morning dew, and their bodies were totally numb from the freezing cold. They carefully picked their way down, but when their feet hit the grass, they looked over to where the funeral had happened. There was nothing. No freshly turned dirt, no mound, no grave. The ground was perfectly flat, completely covered in undisturbed grass. It was exactly as they had found it the night before. They knew they weren't crazy. 7 people don't share the exact same hallucination. Right then and there, they knew without a shadow of a doubt they had just witnessed an angel's funeral. The birds started chirping. The sun was fully up. But the reality of their physical injuries set back in. They were in so much pain they could barely walk. Their water bottles were empty, and Jake's stab wound looked horrific. They started limping, taking breaks every few steps, just trying to keep moving. Finally, around noon, a patrol unit from the Nogales station spotted them. The agents instantly radioed base camp. The terrain was so rugged, they couldn't even bring vehicles out there. The Border Patrol agents had to literally carry these kids on stretchers for miles until they reached a dirt path where a horse-drawn cart was waiting. From there, they were finally transported back to the Nogales camp. When they arrived, the other 7 friends were there waiting for them. Turns out, when Ricardo's squad didn't come back by sunset, the other kids didn't just go home, they went straight to the Border Patrol camp. The camp commander took the situation incredibly seriously. He kept the kids safe overnight and ordered his active night patrols to keep an eye out for any signs of them. Meanwhile, the parents had been notified and were already rushing to the camp. Seeing the physical state the kids were in, the Border Patrol transferred them straight to the local hospital. Jake had to stay in the hospital to recover from the brutal machete wound. The rest of the guys suffered from intense fevers and severe body aches for weeks. But mentally, the scars stayed. For a long time after that, none of those guys would go outside at night. And they physically couldn't sleep unless the lights were completely on. Later on, the families took the boys to speak with a local priest, and what the priest told them sent absolute chills down everyone's spine. He told them that the bald hill they slept on is actually known as an ancient graveyard for angels. He confirmed that they had witnessed an angelic burial. But he gave them a terrifying warning. He said they were incredibly lucky. The angels didn't notice them hiding in that tree. According to him, celestial beings absolutely despise being interrupted by humans during their sacred rituals, and if they had been spotted, the consequences could have been unimaginable. Ever since that trip, whenever anyone from their town plans a field trip to that forest, parents always tell them the story of the 7 boys. They drill it into their kids' heads. Do not wander off the trail, or you might run into things you aren't supposed to see. They survived 2 totally different nightmares that night, and if it wasn't for the Nogales Station Border Patrol, they wouldn't have made it out alive. Ivan, who shared this story with me, specifically asked me to say this. If any of the Nogales Station agents from 2001 are watching or listening to this, Ivan and the rest of the guys want to send you a billion thanks. They have never forgotten you, and they remember your bravery with absolute pride and respect. So guys, I told you at the beginning why I was dedicating this episode to the Border Patrol, and now you know the truth. What did you guys think of this insane story? Have you ever heard of anything like this? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I read all of them. If you enjoyed the video, smash that like button, share it with a friend, and if you're new here, hit that subscribe button to join the family. I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, stay safe and goodbye.